Hello and welcome to the AndyPlex, the show where we talk about movies with creatives. I'm your host, Andy Majorano, and this is episode 27, Blue Thunder and British Lightning. Joining me today to talk about the 1983 underrated action gem starring Roy Scheider and Malcolm Mcdowell, Blue Thunder, is screenwriter, film buff, and now podcaster Phil Gawthorne. Phil is an immigrant story, coming to LA from the UK, and I can't imagine LA without him. Please check out immediately after this, Phil's new action movie podcast, Die Hard on a Blank. I have Phil to thank for being my first guest on the AndyPlex, and in episode 1, Foggy Days, we talked about John Carpenter's The Fog. Phil helped shape my formula for the show, and it's an honor to have him back. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you so much for having me back. It is really cool, that it's been 3 years, and it's lovely to hear that was helped create this project, and the wheels come around because now you've inspired me to go into the podcasting world myself. So it's all cyclical.
This is so cool. I'm brimming at the seams right now. I don't even know where to start because I'm so excited and so pumped to have you back in my apartment. You are a celebrity in my world, in my circle, and a big fan. I'm so glad I met you at the Underwater premiere at the end of 2019. So glad I went. I almost didn't go. And my buddy John Gallagher, who was in the movie, invited me. And I was in an Uber on the way home from the airport, and I saw a poster for Underwater, and I texted John, and he said, "What are you doing right now?" And I was like, oh my goodness. I'm in an Uber, and I'm kind of gross from flying all day from Delaware, so I'm a little out of it. And he's like, come to my premiere at the Alamo Draft House, downtown LA. And I did, and then there was the after thing, and then there was the after thing. And your buddy Will Eubank, the director, was there. John was there, and I brought my buddy Tony with me, and I wore my Thing shirt, and you zeroed in on my The movie The Thing, the 1982 John Carpenter classic with Kurt Russell. And the rest was history, and we became fast friends, and we did the episode Foggy Days, and yeah, that was episode 1, and this is episode 27.
And John was on the show too, wasn't he?
John was on the show, yeah. Shining podcast.
Yeah, amazing episode. I highly recommend everybody to check out. It was particularly an incredible deep dive with you and John on The Shining. Was that episode 3 or 4?
I think that was up to 11 by then.
Oh, was it?
I was pretty quick in the beginning when we were locked down. My job was on the fritz, and I was hanging out in my apartment in my pajamas making podcasts pretty regularly. So, but yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and be sure to check out Foggy Days if you haven't. I want to go a little bit into you and what you have going on. I don't want to retread too much territory from Foggy Days, but you're a screenwriter, and you came to LA with stars in your eyes, and you wanted to write film.
I literally came to LA with 2 suitcases and a Captain America frisbee. And
solid vibranium.
and stumbled my way through. And they haven't deported me just yet. I've been here about 9 years now. So in
so far so good.
Beginnings. It's in the LA of it all is interesting as it pertains to this movie. I don't want to jump ahead, but there is this movie that we're going to talk about is an LA movie in the sense that it captures the essence of the city, and it's one of the reasons I really love this movie, because I do have LA. I really love this city, and my relationship with it's kind of deepened and changed, and you have your ups and downs with it. But recently, over the last couple of years, as things have been crazier and crazier with COVID and the business, and you're sort of, you're at those kind of different stages in life. But about 6 months ago, I was just driving around downtown, and I just was thinking, like, man, I love this city. I really do.
Yeah.
And still, even after 9 years, and this film is almost like a love letter to the city, literally from a unique angle.
It really is. I just rewatched it myself, and you recommended this movie about a year or so ago to me. I think you actually mentioned it when we first met, and then I finally saw it, and now this is my second go on it, and it's one of those movies that we just have to pump out and have to let people know that it's so fantastic. But was it Blue Thunder that made you want to come to LA? I mean, was that kind of for your origin story's sake? Was it?
To be honest, it was actually Drive kind of like sealed the deal for me, because that movie came out a year before I was like planning to move here, and it kind of became my style Bible for life. But I at that point I was a big fan of Blue Thunder, and there's just something about the vibe of LA and the light, literally the light. This is a movie that's full of amazing sunsets, and probably my favorite thing in cinema is a helicopter cutting across the LA sunset, you know, or any sunset. But so and if that's your jam, then this is the movie for you. And so it's definitely the movie for me.
Oh, it's just such an action romp. It isn't a very LA movie. It's beautifully shot. I mean, the sequences are incredible. I'm actually like kind of blown away how they got away with as much as they did, and it just looks so real to me.
It's another reason why I think this movie is special and important. And in the kind of post Top Gun Maverick world that we're in now, in with cinema, that a movie that's kind of almost sort of rebooted cinema to some extent, because now it's such a giant success that I think it has made people think about what our audience is excited about, what is going to make people go to the theater and have a theatrical experience. And for me, I was so pleased at the success of that movie because it was in camera action as opposed to a green screen, set, and you always get some sense of the ersatz nature of just how, the sort of uncanny valley of it, of when action is all computer generated, and there's a sort of numbness that comes to it. But it was such an important thing, I think, for the business that Top Gun Maverick did the kind of numbers that it did. And I think it's interesting because if you trace back some of the lines, I would say that Blue Thunder was almost kind of walked so that the original Top Gun could run or fly, and so that in turn paves the way for Top Gun Maverick, because this movie has some of the most unbelievable in-camera aerial photography and action sequences that you will ever see. So if you're a fan of Top Gun Maverick and that kind of vibe, then please find Blue Thunder however you can and get involved with it, because it is just, to me, like this weirdly slept on, like, why is nobody talking about Blue Thunder 24/7 other than me? You know? Because my thesis for this whole thing was why I wanted to talk to you about it, and I did actually briefly mention it when we had the first episode about the fog. My thesis about this is that this is the most underrated action movie of the 1980s.
Wow, that is very high praise, and I might have to agree with you, because you folded me, and thank you for including me in it. I hadn't heard of it, and I love Roy Scheider. I think he's a legend. Daniel Stern, whom we always talk about this time of the year with Home Alone, and he's great in it. Malcolm McDowell, and it's just got some great performances all around, and everyone's great in it, and it opens up so many doors of just the sheer action is so good, but it also continues the conversation about, and I know that's one of the reasons we want to talk about it. It continues the conversation about technology and its use. Is it ethical? Is it right? And I got to say, this time around, I looked up John Badham, and in the same year he put Blue Thunder out, he put out a movie called War Games.
Yeah.
Which,
hell of an 83 for
what a year.
Mr. Badham. And he actually replaced Martin Brest on War Games at the last minute, who was, he replaced him, and then Martin Brest went on to make Beverly Hills Cop, and the rest is history. So that was kind of partly, I think, why he had these two big movies in the same year. But he is a very interesting director if you look at his, the totality of his filmography. He's made some he's quite an eclectic filmmaker. Yeah. But I think he was like the perfect, and this is something if I may just lean in.
Go ahead.
Just talk about this for a second.
Lean away, sir.
It kind of, one of the things I wanted to talk about, where I think this film is also very interesting if you zoom out from it, because it takes place almost at the cultural intersection of the 1970s and the 1980s, meaning that to your point about the themes of it, it's it's indebted to the paranoid conspiracy thrillers of the 1970s. I think the post-Watergate. It's deep suspicion of government, deep suspicion of
the
state
conversation.
Power.
I thought about a lot.
Conversation,
Yeah,
100%. Very much so. Parallax View.
Parallax
3
View.
Days of the Condor.
Oh yeah.
All of those kind of paranoid 70s thrillers. Yet, in John Badham's hands, he's the perfect person to take that kind of material and make it palatable for a more commercial audience in the more optimistic Reagan 80s. But I think what is so interesting about this film is it has its cake and eats it, because it is critical of this piece of machinery, the Blue Thunder helicopter that is so integral to the film. And just to place that in context, the film is about a sort of weaponized police helicopter that has so many surveillance capabilities and weapon systems that it is almost potentially a bridge too far in terms of state power,
too much
and
power,
control over the citizenship and invasion of privacy. And the story essentially goes into a government conspiracy as to they want to use this this helicopter as a demonstration of government power. But what is so adroit about the film, and what Badham's kind of commercial instinct, is that as I say, it sort of has its cake and eats it, because the film frightens us with this machine's capabilities, but then it allows the hero to unleash those capabilities in a way that the audience can embrace, and that is such a skillful thing to do, because the whole film, this helicopter is kind of the villain of the piece, yet at the same time it becomes the horse that our hero rides, and this kind of thing. So it's something that is just very, very skillful. So I think Badham just had that knack for popcorn commercialism, but at the same time, this film has quite deep, resonant themes that are so contemporary in this age when we're talking about invasion of privacy and the commodification of our private lives and our private data and our private information is one of the most, I think, substantial issues that we're dealing with and trying to figure out as a society, because every time you click on any website, it's
tracking.
Got cookies, accept all, or do you want to fill out a 10-page form to not accept all, right? And we're just in this age of like, oh gosh, the convenience of, is it fine? We're just slowly selling
I don't have
data.
time to not accept, and I got to move on, and they get us at every turn. There's an Alexa Echo Dot sitting right next to us right now, Phil, probably hearing all this.
Yes, I'm sure I'm on a watch list already for any kind of anti-authority statements that may have been made.
But here we are going on 40 years old. Filmed in, looks like the end of 81, going into 82, and then it came out in 83. And like you said, it could have come out 2 years ago and been in the current conversation. Exactly,
and that's not always. That's not always the case, and yes, as it approaches its 40th birthday, this film couldn't be more relevant. At the same time, it's just one of the most entertaining, exhilarating action movies, and
incredible.
As I say, I sort of feel like it is the most underrated action movie of the 80s, in my opinion, because when we talk about the action movies of the 80s, the conversation usually revolves around Lethal Weapon and Die Hard, and maybe First Blood, or maybe 48 Hours, which is really more of a sort of thriller, a buddy movie. Obviously, Lethal Weapon is too, but typically, those are the kind of tent poles that we think of, and this film never seems to get a look in. And to me, it's become more and more relevant with every passing year. And I just want to get the word out about it, because I just feel like I'm just so passionate about this movie. I just love it so much,
Yeah. It's so entertaining, and when you think about it, you just think of a fun helicopter action movie. But Michael Crichton said a good story should be the sugar-coated pill, where it's sugar-coated, but there's always a nougat of message. And we're filmmakers and film crafters, and we study film, and the things that resonate the most are not just in their entertainment value, but in what they're telling us. And I think you nailed it when you said it walks the line between the two so well. And it's so fun, and then you do get this message, and you do get this probing the kind of relationship between technology, weapons, and power. And if you look at war games even, with Badham. And it's funny, I didn't realize Badham came in late because it seemed so thematically similar in, technology running our nukes and our defensive systems across the world, and surrendering to these computers that are on the rise. And the fact that the Blue Thunder helicopter had a modem in it, I mean, that was so high tech. I mean, obviously now, everything has a modem in it.
There's a suspicion of technology and its weaponization by the government in both movies, and a sort of a critique, at a time when not many people were in the 80s as critical, I think, of the government in mainstream movies. They tended to be. It was just a different era. It was sort of less questioning, I think, than the post-Nixon 70s in the Reagan 80s at that time. Now we look back on it with a probably more critical eye, but I think at the time, again, comparing this to Top Gun, and I love Top Gun and I love Top Gun Maverick, but that is not criticizing in any way militarism or the military-industrial complex.
Right.
It's a total celebration of it. Now, I'm not here to critique Top Gun because I absolutely adore it.
Huge fan here. Did a podcast
sort of
on it.
Contextualizing some of the I think it is. Absolutely. I think it's kind of interesting that Badham made these two movies kind of back to back that are looking at these issues with a sort of critical eye, but also in a kind of humanistic way as well.
Yeah, very human.
Is cool.
And then Short Circuit.
Again, which is
very similar.
We forget
themes.
That it starts out. Short Circuit has
He's
a
weapon.
scene that it's very similar.
Got the laser.
There's a weapons testing demonstration, which also happens in
Blue Thunder. I know when I was watching Blue Thunder just now, I was like, my God, there's that Short Circuit theme.
Yeah, and of course, Short Circuit again is much more lighter, more family-oriented movie.
More children
absolutely
oriented. Yeah,
fucking love, by the way.
Amazing.
And the sequel too.
I saw 2 before I saw 1, and I'd probably seen 2 more.
I actually think 2 is a superior film.
I might agree with you there.
There's actually a lot of interesting themes about that resonated with me because it's kind of this might sound a bit silly, sort of talking about Short Circuit 2.
This is a safe space, Phil. You can say whatever you want.
That was a story that was actually kind of, it resonated with me because it was actually sort of an immigrant story. It's about him trying to figure out his place as an outsider.
Wow.
And it ends with him getting his citizenship and getting recognized.
Yeah.
So for me, when I was a kid, of course, none of that meant anything to me. But now, as an immigrant here in America,
from the UK,
so what I think is, it's just, that one wasn't Badham. The sequel was Kenneth Johnson, as I recall. But Badham is quite skilled, I think, at making these popcorn, commercial, broadly appealing movies, but that do have a thematic weight underneath them.
Right.
I've loved so many of his movies. The Stakeout movies as well.
Mm-hmm.
Less kind of thematic, deep stuff going on, but just great romps, both of them. Super funny, amazing chemistry. The Hard Way is another one that I love with Michael J. Fox.
I've never seen that one.
It's great. It's another great sort of slept-on action comedy buddy movie. It's quite edgy and very funny satire of Hollywood. Because he's like, Michael J. Fox is plays a spoiled Hollywood star who gets partnered with a sort of foul-mouthed, aggressive New York cop played by James Woods, and he's researching a character, and it's hilarious.
Love Woods.
That's
awesome.
It's amazing.
I gotta see it.
So anyway, Badham, great.
Yeah, this guy's a dynamo. I mean, he's Saturday Night Fever, I guess, was his breakout directorial. But yeah, I mean, his track record is so good. But honestly, just today, looking at it, and obviously getting into the deep dive of Blue Thunder, and just seeing the analysis of technology, specifically either weapons, mostly, or security, and like what's the line between defense and offense, and Blue Thunder does it so well. The top brass, Malcolm McDowell, was it Cochran? His name?
Yes.
Who you hate immediately. Because he's like the rival from the Vietnam.
He's a filthy Brit.
Don't trust him.
Yeah.
None of them, except for you, Phil.
Yeah.
But yeah, so so like the top brass is already kind of you're critical of him, and Roy Scheider doesn't like him, and they have this history that you get in these little glimpses from these quick flashes, the flashbacks to the Vietnam War, and we immediately identify with the kind of everyman of Roy Scheider who's been through it, and analyzing basically the double-sided nature of commands and orders, and how there's a desk and then there's a field. And there's literally a scene when Roy Scheider sits on, was it War Notes? Mm-hmm. I guess this was his last.
The Captain Braddock, yeah.
Yeah, Captain Braddock. He sits literally on his desk, and he's like, "Get off my desk."
Yeah.
And for some reason, that just hit me. That was the allegory, just boiled down for me, right there. You know, the captain's not really the heavy or the villain, but it was kind of the dynamic between, this is my desk, and you're out there in the field, and there's a line there. But Roy Scheider has been in war, and he's seen death, and he's seen how weaponized, technology plays out in the real world. So that's kind of the line between the desk and the people who give the orders, and then the people that are actually executing the orders, and the crossfire they're in. I really thought this movie just explores that well.
It explores sort of the hierarchical power in an interesting way. And one of the things, the other elements that I really love about this movie, and I think it's a really interesting point. I mean, there's so many things I love about it. One of which is that relationship between Warren Oates and Roy Scheider, which I think is just so real, as walking the line between two guys that respect each other, who are middle-aged men, and they're both police, personnel, but one of them is in a power position and the other one isn't. But at the same time, their dynamic it isn't the usual hairdryer police captain, like in something like a great movie, 48 Hours, but that suddenly became a sort of stereotype,
trope,
and a trope of the genre. This just to me felt way more nuanced, and real. But the other point I was going to make to your point about walking that line that I think is so interesting about this movie is that it's sort of an exploration of heroism in an interesting way, because for Roy Scheider's character Frank Murphy, he who is a Vietnam vet, so he's been part of the military structure, which is an extension of the government. Now he is part of the Astro Division, a police officer, part of another state institution, and for him to the journey he goes on to become a hero is doing the hardest, when doing the right thing is the hardest thing to do, and it means going against the institutions that you're part of. So as opposed to other action movies from this era, which typically I think are like, say, First Blood, which is really kind of probably the original action movie of the kind of modern era of movies. But if you think about movies like First Blood or Cobra or Commando or the Chuck Norris type movies, essentially they're often about a protagonist mowing down the other, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's scores of people who are other than the protagonist.
Just whether bad guys.
They're just bad guys being slaughtered en masse, right? But in this movie, it's someone instead of going the American flag going outwards, as it were, it's going inwards. It's him taking on corrupt government, the police themselves, the Air Force towards the end, and all of these, these governmental structures at great personal cost and great personal sacrifice. And I think that places it in a very different context than a lot of the action movies of that era, which I think is another reason why I think it's just such an interesting exploration of the nature of heroism.
I love that. Yeah. Right. I mean, Roy Scheider could just kind of keep his head down and just be the cog in the machine and do, the orders come in. But like you said, though, even the Warren Oates is like starting to feel just so stuck. And he's got the brass down his neck.
He's in the middle.
And he's so caught.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's not the usual. Just like come into my office. You guys have been too much, and you gotta tone it down, boys. It's not like that dynamic, like you just said. He's like, oh man, you got to work with me. I'm just trying to do my best. I'm in the desk, but yeah, at some point you gotta draw the line. Like, what side are you really on? And Roy Scheider he's just had enough. And then once Lyman Good gets whacked, I mean, you're just like, all right, these guys are evil. Sorry. And he gets run over, and it's just terrible because they basically using the Blue Thunder helicopter they hear because he can hear a fart at a rat fart? Was it a
mouse
mouse?
fart at 4,000 feet or something? He says that's a quote.
Yeah, that's a good quote from the movie. And they hear this conversation that the bad guys are having in the tower, but then Malcolm McDowell sees that they're right there, and then that starts the whole thing of them being hunted down, and then we have to get this tape of the recording to the right folks. So it's just like the moment where he's like, I have to do something about this. I can't lie down on this, and I have to do it, and it's risking my life. It's risking, and then he gets his wife involved, risking her life. But he has to do this, and like you said, he's chosen his path as the hero to stand up against these forces, which are internal. There are corrupt conspiracy. There's a conspiracy within the American government. There was an assassination that kind of gets the whole thing going on. And they want to use this Blue Thunder helicopter because it can see and hear everything to suppress any rebellion against their authority as this kind of corrupt conspiracy.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that I feel like this is a film that, for the most part, and there's a notable exception, but I think it's on the right side of history in that regard. And most of the movies of the Reagan 80s had this gleeful fetishism of military hardware. We were in that era of rapid military expansion,
Star Wars,
and again Top Gun and then Airwolf and things like that. That ripped. It was sort of a rip.
I mean, Star Wars, the actual laser-guided missile system, not the movie.
Yes,
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, because it was an era where America was trying to reassert its geopolitical dominance. I think after the humiliation of the Iran hostage crisis in 1980, that was sort of Carter's. That I think accelerated Jimmy Carter's demise. So America was sort of perceived being kind of weak, and then you're moving to the Reagan era.
Right, we got to step it up, and
it's now a little bit more like cocking the shotgun, as a country, and being like, let's go. And I think a lot of the movies at that time were sort of a celebration of like, yeah, we're American, we're back, and so there was
don't mess with us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There was a kind, and they talk about that in the exercise sequence where they demonstrate Blue Thunder. There's I think the character Iceland says something like, we would only use this for our worst case scenario, but it's comforting to know you have it on tap. But immediately Roy Scheider, whose character Frank Murphy has been part of this apparatus in the Vietnam War as a pilot, is immediately suspicious of this, because he is the tool of these bureaucrats that never really see any action and pull the strings from
their desks.
From their desk, to your point. And he's immediately like, this is not good. And he's a pilot who could be taking the action of, this is badass, this is awesome, I'm going to get to fly this thing. But his reaction is, I don't know about this. And the other thing that I think is really interesting about that sequence with where they first demonstrate the Blue Thunder helicopter's capabilities at a display where sort of all these suits and military guys sitting in the bleachers, and they run a kind of weapons scenario test case where the Blue Thunder takes out red wooden terrorists and there's like wooden civilians, and it's basically to sort of demonstrate part of the reason they do the Blue Thunder is because it was 83 and they thought in the 84 Olympics there might be urban unrest or potentially another Munich type situation like happened in the 70s, so that they were looking for preventative anti-terrorism.
And they mentioned the Olympics and they
specifically
in the movie,
and they specifically mention that. But one of the things that I think is interesting about that sequence, which brings me to something else I wanted to mention, is the character. One of the other suits there says that some of the civilians get killed, civilians in quotes, during this training exercise. The white wooden blocks, the white wooden figures, the posters, that are supposed to represent innocent civilians, end up getting killed along with the terrorists in this training scenario. And he comments something like one civilian to every 10 terrorists. That's an acceptable ratio.
Right.
Very kind of matter of fact. And Roy Scheider says the Warren Oates, like, well, not if you're one of the civilians.
Yeah.
Now,
great line.
It's this was very interesting to me because of the other thing I wanted to talk about today, because I've been doing a lot of research about Die Hard. Now, if you remember in Die Hard, the FBI agents that come in literally say, when they're flying in on the helicopter towards the end of the movie, it's Agents Johnson and Johnson, they talk about like the acceptable kill ratio for civilians as long as they take out the terrorists. So in my research about Die Hard, which I've done a huge deep dive on for reasons we're going to talk about, I read the original novel, which is called Nothing Lasts Forever by Roderick Thorpe, written in the late 70s. And there was a culture at the time, I think probably post the Munich, that whole incident, and then some of the other terrorism fears that were going on around that time. There was literally a mantra that was, in quotes, hang them at the airport. Meaning, if there's a terrorist incident, fucking take them all out there and then, and if you take out the hostages in the process, well, tough shit. Because it was almost like they wanted to, that kind of extreme response as a deterrent. Right. So this became a kind of, this was like a culturally understood
We don't
idea.
Negotiate with terrorists.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was, but that is also like, of course, you could, objectively, you can understand the logic of that. But
right.
If you're a hostage and you're in that situation, what a crazy idea to be like, well, the hostages.
You're a number now.
Yeah.
You're not a person.
You lose your identity, which is state
stripped.
power at its most terrifying.
Right.
I think to some extent. So this was a kind of cultural attitude that was going on in, seemingly in law enforcement or military and anti-terrorism. This was part of the attitude in that time. So it was interesting, and not many people I think were as questioning of it. But Die Hard is also a film that I think is very critical of state power, and almost that it's critical of those rogue, reckless FBI agents and the police, largely like the ineffectual police.
The bumbling,
the SWAT team and the armored car. And
they're no help.
That's ultimately kind of emasculated. There's only Al Powell that's like the one, and McClane, who are the sort of, again,
only
the sort of
power players,
the beat kind of cops, as it were.
Yeah, right. The beat cops, the everyman.
Guys, the everyman characters,
the Joes,
who are the tools of these institutions.
Right.
They're the only ones that are able to function effectively by not thinking as an individual and not as
this machine,
indoctrinated, institutionalized thinking.
Yeah.
So
that's great. I love that.
It's just,
they're the Joes that you resonate with. You like these guys because they're everyone. You see them. You see yourself in the audience. You see yourselves, and same with Roy Scheider and Blue Thunder. You just like him, and he's been through hell, and he's been through the war, and he's having flashbacks, and he's critical, and you just like the guy.
It's also interesting that Roy Scheider actually had Air Force experience and actually did some of the flying.
His own stuff
in the film. So he's an interesting figure, I think, again for the sort of the cultural moment where this film came out, because he was really a star of the 70s. We think of Jaws and a French Connection. The supporting role, and then he kind of became, a 70s lead, and he had a great career in the 80s up to a movie I absolutely love called 52 Pickup, where which was one of his, I think, last great leading roles, and then he did a lot of great supporting roles. But this was in a way, I think, almost his the apex of that moment of like carrying on the fame that he had in the 70s and like buttoning it perfectly. Of course, he did 2010, the sequel to 2001.
That was 84?
Next year, which is
1 year
also
later.
An excellent film.
Yeah.
But more, I think, a bit more of an ensemble.
Peter Yates.
Piece, and Peter Hyams.
Peter Hyams, sorry, yes.
Made that one.
Confusing my Peters.
Scheider's such an interesting figure.
So good.
And I was thinking about, the casting of Malcolm McDowell as the Colonel, because I was thinking, there is the one thing that always sort of niggled me slightly about this movie was, why would you cast a Brit as a U.S. Army colonel who had fought in Vietnam and had been his superior? I always found that kind of like slightly strange, and I was sort of thinking, and McDowell is awesome in the movie, but I was kind of thinking like, well, I wonder, is there someone else that would have been more appropriate? And I was thinking, like, in that time in 1983, like Tommy Lee Jones or William Devane or someone like this, and I was sort of thinking about actors like that. And then I thought, no, the problem is they're too close to Scheider, right? If you need
a foil.
You need someone that is is a contrast. Is a complete opposite. You know, Malcolm McDowell is smaller. He's sort of devious.
Yeah.
He has a reptilian energy to him. You just want to hit him in the best possible way. Like, he's a brilliant villain. But that was so I kind of understood. It's one of those things that works dramatically, if not logically.
Yeah.
In the casting, because they're just totally different energies. But he's not what you would immediately think of as a U.S. Army colonel. But for the purposes of this film, it works really well.
Apparently, he was absolutely horrified to get in the helicopters.
Yes.
Yeah, he was like he vomited apparently almost every time.
Apparently, he.
What's the story I read?
That's right. His agent had done a deal that he wasn't supposed to fly in any of the scenes. But when he got on the set and he saw Scheider doing it and the other guys doing it, the machismo kicks in. And he couldn't admit that he was afraid to do it. So
I got to be able to hang.
Credit, he did it.
Yeah.
But you can kind of see in some of the scenes that he's pretty bug-eyed, especially in the finale.
Yeah, I mean, it plays well for the dramatic circumstance of the scene.
Yeah, yeah.
But apparently that was like not acting.
He's very visceral. He's very present because of that.
Yeah.
He's completely there. So it does feel very, very real. You don't think he's in a cockpit in a green screen, is what I mean.
No, not at all.
You definitely feel the sense of like they're really doing this stuff.
Yeah.
For a large part of it, they actually work.
Right, and that's kind of great that it all has to culminate in a big aerial battle.
Yeah, and by the by, so this movie moves to a third act that I would put against any action film
perfect
ever made. Literally.
Just perfect.
Like the last and it's a long third act. It's about 35, 40 minutes, I think. But
yeah, just past the hour markish.
Yeah, the film is sort of interestingly structured because the first half is more setup and character development, and then the conspiracy plot kind of escalates, and then it becomes the final showdown where Frank Murphy, Roy Scheider's character, takes the Blue Thunder, goes rogue, and then all hell breaks loose, and then Cochran, played by McDowell, comes after him, along with the might of the U.S. Air Force, the 2 F-16s, and the LAPD, and I just think
the Metropolitan Police,
right? Because technically they're not the LAPD, because the Astro Division is technically not the correct name, but
yeah, they never actually say LAPD like famously in the movie.
They didn't want it said, apparently. They didn't
right.
Even though they were actually quite supportive of the film, apparently. But if you look at this sequence, particularly like the LA River pursuit, where there's a LAPD, in quotes, police Bell helicopter pursuing the Blue Thunder through the LA River, I think about films like Ambulance recently.
Oh yeah, you recommended that one. It was awesome.
An amazing sequence in the LA River with 2 helicopters pursuing the ambulance. Of course, Terminator 2 has a classic chase through the LA River and a classic helicopter chase. So and there's also a signature shot at the beginning where the first time the Blue Thunder is introduced, and it's backlit against a setting sun. And to me, that's that's Michael Bay all over.
Oh yeah.
And I feel like this film was also very influential on people like Michael Bay and James Cameron and Tony Scott. And this, if you look at this particular sequence, this incredible third act, in camera, helicopters dueling over Los Angeles. It's some of the most exhilarating action filmmaking you will ever see.
It's
and
unbelievable.
You can see echoes of subsequent iconic action sequences that came from that, I think.
Absolutely. It's definitely woven into the DNA, and I can't believe that it's not in the conversation more. Now, having not
of course,
being aware of it.
Of course, this will all change that.
Yes. After today, no one will think twice on. No one will sleep on Blue Thunder again. It's. I also want to say that the wife, played by Candy Clark, is not your damsel in distress at all. She is. You can really believe that she has been with this guy, and is such a badass, and jumps to action. She has the tape that she has to ferry to the forces of good before they can be destroyed, and they have the truth on this tape that Daniel Stern has hidden in a dumpster, and she is so good in this, and she just jumps to it and throws herself into the peril. And the intercutting between what's going on the ground with her, and then the stuff in the sky, and then the forces barreling down on them, is just, like you said, that third act, which is long, like you said, it's just unbelievable. And I almost think this movie might have a little too much setup, but both times I've watched that, I've had that thought for a second, and then I feel like I have that thought 2 seconds before the third act.
Yeah.
And then by the end of the third act, you're like, oh my god.
I know exactly what you mean.
It's pure action.
There is a section in the sort of around the midpoint of the film where it is a little slower.
Yeah.
You know? But then it
all pays off.
It all pays off. So
it all
I
pays
don't
off.
think there's anything you can cut. But I completely agree with you about the.
I wouldn't cut a thing.
No, it's too well it's too well designed from plot mechanics standpoint.
But it is atypical, and I did get to sit in on your screenwriting course a few months ago, which was so awesome. And you're such a I'm still so blown away. I still have the notes, and you talk about how like every scene has to have that conflict and every scene, and obviously learn the rules so you can then break the rules, but break them well. And I don't think the big finale would have the gravitas and weight. I mean, obviously the shots are the shots and they're beautiful, but dramatically it would not have any of the meaning and value if it didn't set up all the things we talked about between the brass and then the cops and the people that are in the middle and then the pilots, and learning about what they do and kind of their route and their beat, and it's Daniel Stern and Roy Scheider just flying around in the helicopter in the beginning, and then they get the Blue Thunder, and then it's like learning that and being in that, and as an audience becoming familiar with the technology of Blue Thunder. So I don't think anything would culminate and crescendo properly if we didn't have those elements. But both times I'm watching this movie, I literally was like, okay, it's getting a little like, all right. But then, boom.
Yeah.
But there's another movie that does that perfectly, and it's Jurassic Park. And if you actually look at Jurassic Park, it's a lot of talk. It's a lot of, and again, back to Crichton, you have your message, and then you give them you wow them. And then by the end of the movie, you're like, that was just 2 hours of nonstop action. You forget almost.
It's perfectly constructed. I wanted to just pick up on your point about the Candy Clark character, because that is the other piece of this that makes me truly love this movie, and why I think it is, for the most part, on the right side of history and quite a progressive film. I want to temper that by saying there is a couple of sequences that literally define the male gaze, in the sense of the two characters, looking at naked
yoga
and using their position in the helicopter to look at to sort of objectify women. So in that side of it, and they sort of pay a price for that, and they're hauled over the coals for it. But that side of it, I think, probably hasn't aged quite so well in for the 21st century. But what I do think is really notable about what you were saying is that most films of this time, a lot of action films of this time, tend to be, as you say, in the third act, the bad guys kidnap the hero's wife, girlfriend, daughter, whatever, and the female characters are very often rendered dramatically inert and passive, and that's a sort of I think quite a sexist trope that many of the movies of that time had, and it goes back to the beginning of film, the damsel in distress, or beginning of storytelling even. But I think in the modern era that is kind of just icky and gross, and it's just we've kind of moved beyond that.
Yeah.
And what I love about this the Candy Clark character Kate is that she is totally dramatically active and as courageous,
absolutely,
if not more, than Frank Murphy, the hero, and the two of them are working together to hit her on the
she's
ground.
On the ground and he's the air support.
He's the air support.
Yeah,
and they work.
It's so good.
But I love the way that their relationship is so beautifully drawn, because it's really dysfunctional. They're like on again, off again.
Right.
She has a kid that doesn't seem to be his.
Yeah, I was going to ask you.
She seems like a single mother with this kid, but he has a relationship with the kid. They clearly kind of get along, and
he fell asleep in the room, and
and they're close. But what I love about it is they're both kind of crazy, and they're both like messed up people.
Right.
But and so when she decides to say, "Look, fuck it, ride or die, I'm gonna do this," it makes you buy it
Whereas a quote-unquote normal person that was maybe a bit less, because she establishes quite a reckless, wild character. And this is done in it's very skillfully to the point about the setup, in a sequence where they go to Griffith Park, and to take the kid on the like the toy train that's there, the train that's for kids that runs around the little track there. And it's another thing that I love about the movie, because it's actually accurate to LA geography, because that's right by where I live, and I take my son there.
Oh yeah, right.
And it is one way. It's a one-way street around that area in Griffith Park. And what Candy Clark's character does, she misses the turn for the train, which is very easily done, because I've done it many times.
You're like, I've missed that same turn.
And she just turns the car around and goes against traffic, one-way traffic, and it's a crazy, reckless, nutty thing to do, but it establishes that her character is willing to do those things later on, and is kind of reckless, and is kind of wild, and is kind of crazy, but is also loyal and knows right from wrong, and is like, push comes to shove, is ride or die for the man that she loves, and for these values that are established in the film, which is, she knows the difference between right and wrong, and justice, and what is, the right thing to do. And it just pays off so well. And that is such a refreshing character to see in a time where, there wasn't a ton of
amongst
amazing,
its peers,
female characters in action movies.
Right.
Of course, that went on to change, I think, with Sarah Connor and Ripley, and
James Cameron being a big proponent of
there
strong
are
females.
There are certainly exceptions, but I think for the most part it probably wasn't the most progressive
in its
era
time
in that regard. And this is just one of the most awesome characters, and I think she's fantastic.
She's so good.
She's so sparky.
She kills it.
She just lights up the screen. She's so interesting and quirky and real, and I think their relationship is so cool, just because it's a mess. And it feels real. It feels textured and real.
Life is a mess.
Yeah.
We're all hanging on. We're all hanging on for dear life. We're trying to balance our jobs with our home life, and and it is messy. And I think every human being has a degree of PTSD. We didn't all fight in the Vietnam War, but life is hard.
Post the pandemic. We've all lived through. I mean, it would be churlish to compare it to actual, the PTSD that's featured in this film with trauma that's accrued in warfare. But nonetheless, I think on a
it's a
different
factor.
way, and a lot of people have their own version of that.
Right.
That they have to live with on a daily basis. And it was, again, I think that's another thing, the PTSD element of this, something that wasn't largely as understood in that time. Of course, the year before there'd been First Blood, which also directly explores a character with a hero with PTSD, and explores it in pretty direct ways, similar like flashbacks to some of the torture that John Rambo faced, and which is similar to some of the things that Scheider witnesses in this film. Which is actually a war crime, and so that, I think, again, is something that we were starting to understand as a society. The nature of PTSD, and this film touches on that. So it's just, to me, for the most part, it's pretty kind of ahead of the curve in a really cool way, and so many. And this is also, there's all these deep, cultural interpretations. This is taking aside the fact that switch your brain off completely, and it's the most kick-ass, fucking exhilarating action movie
it's a romp
you'll ever see.
Yeah,
but there's also a bit more to it.
But it's not just that, I mean, and in any genre across the board, if the character work isn't there, then the dramatic tension is not there. It doesn't matter how many cool explosions you have, but if you really, really, like here, you really, really want Roy to prevail and Candy Clark, and you want.
It's edge of the seat.
You're like, oh my God, please get out of this, And sure, he's got Blue Thunder, but he's still outnumbered 10-1, and the forces are just barreling down on him. And so many things have to happen correctly, and then the tape has to get out. And you just care so much. And like in a horror, you're not going to be on the edge of your seat if you don't care about these characters.
Yeah.
So you can have torture porn films that are just gory and gross. And sure, that there's an element of that. I love a good gore scene. I'm a big fan of gore in movies, but if you don't care about the character that's being attacked or whatever, then it loses a lot of the emotional weight, and that goes across every genre.
Well, we talked about the quote that I love that's become a sort of, a tenet for me. That was a Stephen King quote that we talked about in the previous episode when we talked about The Fog, where he'd said, I tried to create sympathy for my characters, then turn the monsters loose.
Yes.
In this instance, the monsters are these institutions and the government and
Right.
the military hardware and all the rest of it.
Right.
So it kind of, he's speaking specifically about horror, but I think it
Doesn't matter.
applies
Yeah.
to most genres.
Yeah.
Really, storytelling in general.
Storytelling, yeah.
It probably applies to almost every story. That principle. So yeah, and this is a great and that's why you need that slightly slower first half. Although there's still some amazing action sequences in that first half, but it is all developing those relationships. The relationship between Frank Murphy and Braddock, his boss, the relationship between him and Lyman Good, his protege, the relationship with him and his on-again, off-again girlfriend, Kate, and all of these different, things that are going on. His relationship with his nemesis, Cochrane. You need all of those things because, boy, does it pay it off.
It all pays off, and the way this movie crescendos and the powder keg of it, it's a masterclass in action and in storytelling in general. Have you always gravitated towards action as a screen
Yeah.
as a lover of movies and a screenwriter?
I have, yeah. I mean, going back to when I was a kid, the cool thing was I grew up as a child of the 80s in what was ushering in the golden age of action cinema, which I would say was really the 80s and the 90s. And nowadays we still have some great action movies like we've just talked about, like Ambulance and Top Gun Maverick, and they're still they're still making them. But in that era, there were so many, I think, high quality action movies.
The golden
particularly
age,
in
if
the
you were.
90s. Yeah, definitely a golden age. So yes, I've always been a big action aficionado.
Yeah. Was there? I'm always interested in kind of the origin stories. Like for Phil Gawthorne, was there a moment where you saw an action movie and you were just like, I want to create this, or I want to be part of this?
Well, certainly the one that springs to mind that I watched the most by far in terms of a straight action movie as a kid was Die Hard. And
Masterpiece.
I think that, and that over the dozens and dozens of viewings that I had every Christmas, that taught me, I think, I sort of subconsciously absorbed all of those lessons because that is a masterpiece. I think, Blue Thunder, I think, is a slightly flawed, almost masterpiece, whereas Die Hard is a legit perfect movie. In every
Perfect
every
marks
way.
across the board.
Yeah, there's nothing you can fault about it. There's not one moment that could be cut. There's not one setup that doesn't pay off. Everything about it to me is total perfection. So that
Best villain probably in anything.
The best villain in action movie cinema, arguably the best villain in any movie. Period.
Yeah.
Legit.
Yeah.
So,
Alan Rickman, R.I.P. Miss him.
Yeah.
But that was his first movie.
Yeah.
What? How?
Yeah.
How?
Incredible. And it's another thing, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today was to talk about the podcast that I
think it's a
have,
good transition here because it is Die Hard.
Yeah,
DNA.
so it would seem silly to not bring it up. I conceived and I co-host a new podcast called Die Hard on a Blank, which is being produced by Sugar 23, and it comes out on December 21st and will be available on all platforms: Apple, Spotify, Audible, iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts. And in the first 2 episodes, we do a super deep dive on the original Die Hard. We're doing a 2-part episode. First of all, we talk through the movie. I should say, when I say we, I mean my incredible co-host Liam Billingham, who was a very experienced and brilliant podcaster, has his own podcast called Oeuvre Busters, and now it's called Romercast, and it's about the French filmmaker Eric Romer. He's a delightful human being and an amazing cinephile with an incredibly deep well of knowledge. And we hit it off, and we met, and it was just the perfect chemistry to do this show. So the first 2 episodes are as going. We talk through every scene of Die Hard in detail, and then in the second episode we talk about the origins of Die Hard, which includes the Frank Sinatra movie, The Detective, and the Towering Inferno, and the original source material, the book by Roderick Thorpe, Nothing Lasts Forever, that
Nothing Lasts Forever, yeah.
Earlier, that we talk about the differences and the similarities and everything that led up to Die Hard. And then to your point about like the perfect marks, we go through. I've created this sort of system called Anatomy of an Action Movie, and we go through. We look at like, hero, villain, the premise, ticking clock, and the action itself, and also the humor, which I think is often is an important part.
Such a huge part of it.
Of action cinema. You know, Blue Thunder has some really funny moments and funny lines. So yeah, the central conceit of the podcast as a whole, beyond the first 2 episodes, is that it's an exploration of the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. So we're going to trace that, what we call the Die Hard DNA, as it evolves and changes. And of course, we call it Die Hard on a blank because that is the cultural shorthand for any film that tries to replicate that very particular storytelling formula of bad guys take over a blank bus, boat, plane, what have you.
Okay, let's hear the trailer.
Welcome to the party, pals. I'm Phil Gawthorne, action movie screenwriter.
And I'm Liam Billingham, movie podcaster.
And together we host Die Hard on a Blank, a podcast from Sugar 23 that explores the influence of Die Hard on action cinema. In each episode, we'll talk about one major action movie that was released after Die Hard.
Now, some of these movies take place on a bus.
On a boat.
Or even a roadhouse.
Sure. The point is, these are action movies that couldn't exist without Die Hard, and its DNA is everywhere.
Die Hard on a Blank is a celebration of action movies and a deep dive into the ways that Die Hard shaped the action genre.
So if you're a casual fan or an action movie Die Hard...
Ooh, very nice.
Then Die Hard on a Blank is for you. Yes, you personally.
Our first 2 episodes, which are all about the original 1988 masterpiece Die Hard, drop December 21st, because Die Hard is a Christmas movie, wherever you get your podcasts. Phil, do the line.
Now we have a podcast.
Ho, ho, ho.
Oh god, it's so good. Even the trailer, I can't stop listening to it. It's so good. You guys are so, just from that 1-minute trailer, you two are just awesome together already.
That's so cool to hear because thank
I love
you.
it.
It is one of those things where when you just hit it off with someone, and like you and I did, which is kind of rare sometimes later in life.
Right.
Because often we're in our little silos and you don't often meet people.
Yeah.
That you're
kind of set in our ways.
But when you meet other cinephiles that are as crazily, weirdly, esoteric, obsessed with all of this shit like you and I are, and Liam is the same way, then it is like finding a kindred spirit. And very quickly we did find that we had this, I think hopefully a great chemistry. And it's one of those, I feel the same way like with you, where it's like you could have a conversation, preferably with a whiskey in hand, that could last for 2-3 hours about a movie or a particular series of movies or what have you, and just be like so interested to pick this person's brain and what's your opinion about this?
Really get under there,
because you're truly fascinated by, everyone comes to this stuff bringing their own trajectory in life and their own cultural references, their own background, all of those things that make us unique and individual. So, and then when they intersect to discuss a piece of art, a piece of cinema, they're bringing all that to the table as well. And I think that makes, when you meet someone like that you truly kind of click with and you truly love their company, it makes, hopefully, for what will be a really, really fun discussions. And the vibe of the show is very inviting, we hope, and we take the subject seriously, but we kind of don't take ourselves too seriously.
Playing in the sandbox.
Yeah, it's just we're having fun, and talking about stuff that we love in a passionate way. And we also have fun things like we give out awards for these movies that are Die Hard themed. So maybe we should do this for this one as a fun exercise if you're up for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we do. The first one is the Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for Best Quip. So what the best zinger or the best the best piece the best
I gotta say when
dialogue.
Roy Scheider blows away the helicopter at the end and he says "see you later" and points finger points, I mean that got me
Pretty
so
satisfying.
hard. That for
Catch
me
you
that
later.
would be it. Yeah, for me that would be the Yippee-Ki-Yay. But I mean I don't know.
Yeah, that's
what
true.
do you think?
Yeah, that is. I mean, it's full of
Yeah, it's full of them.
it's full of good stuff. But yeah, that is probably certainly the most iconic line. I wouldn't disagree with that. It's Malcolm McDowell's catchphrase throughout the film is going "catch you later," and
Yeah,
of course
turning it on his head.
It's buttoned at the end, and it's like it's obvious, but it's all sometimes it's like it's just a fucking bullseye. Even though it is obvious he's gonna say it, you're like, "Fuck yeah!"
Yeah, like you can't wait for him to say it.
It's awesome. So I would say that couldn't agree more. Perfect example. The second award that we give out is the Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the movie. So this is given to a supporting actor that delivers the most memorable performance, or is like the low-key, scene stealer, or
Low-key hero.
Steals the movie. And there's quite a few candidates in Blood Thunder.
I gotta go Candy Clark. She just again. I mean, we talked about it earlier, and she just steals your heart by the end.
Yeah.
And you don't like you nailed it that you don't question her ride or die, turn the jets on. There's a little bit of unhinged mania behind her eyes where you don't question her going into opposing traffic and just taking the task at hand by the reins and attacking. And yeah, I just love that she's so atypical female, as you said, to the contemporary peers of the time of this era, and she just nails it.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree. I think Warren Oates would be nominated for me for
He's
sure.
amazing.
Danny Stern too, but
Yeah.
and I truly love Warren Oates in this movie, and of course the movie's dedicated to him. And
he passed
away
before it released,
shortly,
right?
Shortly
Oh,
after.
man, that adds another
filmmaking.
layer
He's
to it
such
for
a
sure.
Wonderful actor. So his offbeat cadence and his just the way he could imbue this somewhat stock character with so much life,
So much humanity.
personality, and idiosyncrasies. Absolutely wonderful actor. But I do agree that Candy Clark is just phenomenal in this movie.
Just scene
So
stealing.
I totally agree. And the last one of the awards that we do is the best death, which is for an action movie analysis. Is a fun one to discuss.
Yeah, I gotta say, I forgot that Daniel Stern just gets run over by that car, and it's so heartbreaking to see him just get crushed by that car.
Interestingly, on the commentary, John Badham was saying he regretted doing that because the audience, I think, really, Danny Stern at that age is
Pretty young.
young, so likable.
Yeah.
The character is so likable. He's just got a real light touch, and
What was it, Joppo? Just another, what is
Jaffo,
it?
yeah.
Jaffo.
Just another fucking observer.
Just another fucking observer.
That's his nickname in the film. So he was actually saying, I think the audience responded so well to his character and stuff that he felt he should have just been maybe hospitalized and not killed because it kind of bummed the audience out. So it was interesting that he had some regret about that because it's quite a grisly.
It's a grisly demise
grisly
for sure.
Sequence.
But I feel like that, for me, gives you the dramatic push to be like, all right, these guys are just pure evil, and they're willing to just snuff out any. These guys will go to any
Raises
lengths.
the stakes.
It raises the stakes for, like you said, that last 45 minutes of.
Yeah.
Like, these guys are just gonna kill you. They don't care.
Yeah.
They're just gonna ice you. They don't give a fuck.
So
to me, it
revenge,
works.
It's also it motivates Scheider's character to
Yeah.
go that extra mile to stick it to these fuckos.
Yeah, and then it's dramatically like, get these guys, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel Stern is he's the everyman. He's funny. He's great. You see yourself in him. He nails it.
He has a kind of innocence in this.
He's
movie.
an innocence to him,
a sweetness to him.
Yeah.
It just
works really, really
Even
well.
as Marv in Home Alone, I mean, sure, he's a shitty bandit, but
he's just likable.
He's
you
just
know?
likable,
Even
you know?
even when he plays like a shitty character, like in Diner, there's just something. He's
Yes.
so interesting to watch.
yeah.
You know, and he does have a kind of low key humanity about him that's just. You know what's also weird? I was thinking about Daniel Stern is there's 2 movies where he's been violently run over. Very Bad Things. He's also
Oh my God! Right.
gets
was that
gets a
90,
horrific.
98, 99? What was that?
You know, so that was just a kind of weird.
Huh.
weird
I did not
thing.
put
Like,
that
How
together.
many actors have been badly run over?
Yeah, he's like, oh, I know how to do this, guys. I was in Blue
And both
Thunder.
of
I
them
got run
are
over.
really like graphic and
Yeah.
sort of upsetting. But that's by the by.
So,
So,
what about for you?
well, for me, it's the ending. It's as you said, it's you know, when
Yeah,
when
Cochran gets it.
Scheider pulls the sort of 360 loop, and you know, and then takes out Cochrane. It's with buttoning with the line "Catch you later."
Catch you later. And the finger point.
It's just like it's so satisfying. You know, it's such a satisfying movie, and it's such a satisfying finale. So
Yeah.
for me, I would have to go with that in this instance. But this is the kind of
What's the award again? Sorry.
This Best Death.
Best Death.
It's presented by we call it like presented by Marco, who is the character, because Liam is a huge fan of we sometimes play a game called like Who's Your Favorite Terrorist.
Okay.
So like
Yeah.
in Die Hard you've got quite a colourful list of characters to choose from, but there was a character called Marco who is the one who goes, no more table, where are you going, pal? Next time you have a chance to kill someone, don't hesitate. And then of course McClane blows him away from under the table with the zinger, thanks for the advice. So
Are you going to do a whole episode as Marco?
well, Liam's obsessed with Marco.
Because your voice is, you nailed it.
So
Okay.
he
might pick it.
He's a big Marco guy. I'm a big Fritz guy myself.
Yeah?
I'm a big fan of Fritz.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of this is the kind of shit we do on the show.
Oh,
think
I
it's
can't
really
wait
fun.
for your show, man.
Yeah. So December 21st, Die Hard on a Blank. Wherever you find your podcast, you can subscribe and follow. And please, you know, come to the party. Join the party.
Absolutely. The Christmas party.
The Christmas
Nakatomi
party. Exactly.
Tower.
Exactly.
So I guess you will have to do films that come after Die Hard.
Yes, exactly. So, you know, my my vision for the show is to actually go chronologically.
Okay.
So we go based on release date,
Mm-hmm.
and my vision ultimately is that in its totality at the end of the show we'll have a kind of comprehensive look at you'll be able to literally track how this Die Hard DNA
The pedigree.
evolved, mutated, how
Yeah.
other films like, say, Speed, Die Hard on a Bus, then became its own formula that was replicated with films like Unstoppable or Ambulance, how John McTiernan started the franchise of Hunt for Red the Jack Ryan franchise with Hunt for Red October, which then evolved into its own thing with Patriot Games,
It's on
Clear and
subgenre.
Present Danger. So
Yeah.
sort of how it had all of these offshoots, almost like we call it kind of like action movie genealogy. So we'll be going through and tracking all of these different trends, because sometimes the Die Hard DNA isn't as obvious as the premise itself is a direct Die Hard scenario. Sometimes the way that the DNA seeps in is a little bit more subtle. For example, one of the films on the list is License to Kill, the 1989 Timothy Dalton
Oh,
Bond
yeah,
movie.
Bond movie. Which
It
is very much the
features,
oddball. Black
very
Sheep.
much an outlier in the Bond canon.
Absolutely.
But it features the same composer as Die Hard.
Oh.
Two of the actors that we mentioned earlier, the two FBI agents,
Oh, shoot.
Johnson and Johnson. Robert Davi plays the villain, and Grandel
There
Bush
you go.
plays a DEA agent. So there's all kinds of
Wow.
ways that Die Hard influenced the action genre beyond the obvious Die Hard.
Even on
point-blank
franchises that
scenarios.
predate, even,
yeah,
like
exactly.
Bond,
You
yeah.
know, I think the Bond was responding there to the Bond franchise is responding to the Joel Silver trend of the time.
Right.
They have Joel Silver's composer, Michael Kamen. It's shot in a very glossy way. It's a very violent. It's one
It's
of the
so
most violent,
bloody.
Darkest
Darkest one,
films.
definitely the dark. Probably the. I mean, I'd have to think of it. There's so many, but definitely one of the darkest.
And it's
Bonds.
also largely set in America, which is different. But the
Very
look
different.
of the film and the sound of the film,
Right.
and everything feels very much a response
to the kind of Joel Silver brand that was, perfected with Lethal Weapon and Die Hard.
Right. Kind of like Quantum of Solace responding to Bourne Identity, kind of taking the cutting speed.
Yeah, exactly. And we talk about the Bournes, and again, which
it's a conversation.
The Bourne is arguably an evolution of Jack Ryan, to some extent.
Sure.
It's making Jack Ryan more visceral. More, there's more emphasis on the physicality of the character than with Jack Ryan. He's a lethal killing machine, but of course the Bourne movies, they date back to the Ludlum books, and there was a Bourne Identity movie made in the 70s. So all of these, it's all kind of cyclical in an interesting way, and I'm fascinated by this.
This is great.
By this stuff. I literally, the making of the list, I kind of got obsessed with it and looking at the patterns, and I don't know, I'm just kind of weird like that. But I'm so passionate about action movies, and I think action movies are, as we're talking about with Blue Thunder, culturally, then we sometimes maybe think of them as somewhat lesser or less prestigious or less important, but the truly great ones are these amazing time capsules that are an encapsulation of the zeitgeist and have something to say that especially in the case of Blue Thunder and many of the other films that we discussed, they have something to say about our society.
Absolutely.
About that moment in time when they were made.
I love that.
I love it. I love doing it, and I'm grateful for you having me back on the show to give a chance to let more people
know. Oh my gosh, yeah.
About Die Hard on a Blank.
Die Hard on a Blank. By the time this episode airs, I believe it will already be out. So please check it out. I can't wait to check it out.
I'm
so excited.
We'll have to get you on the show. We'll have to get you on the show.
I would be so honored.
Yeah.
I would love that.
Yeah.
That'd be so cool.
We'll make it happen. Of the era.
Absolutely. Phil.
Yes, sir.
I love podcasting with you.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. It's great to.
I love
be
you, man.
Here, and you're the best, Andy. Thank you so much for having me. For letting me gab and.
Oh my God, gab as in just make amazing point after amazing point. Is that what you mean?
Oh, that's very kind of you. I guess when I get going, I just, I'm super grateful to be back here. It's, you had me on in the first show, which was a real special. Honor.
Started it all.
And it's lovely to be back. So thank you for the opportunity to come in and shoot the shit.
Thanks for coming, brother.